welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters. With your questers, Josh and Dan, I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things quizzical because we have an absolute boatload of emails ahead of us. So if you have any questions for us that did not get into this podcast today, email us at edsg@gmail.com or call us and leave us a voicemail. We appreciate those as well. But Josh has an announcement first.
Yes, so if you have been a regular listener, you may recall an email that we got from a listener a couple of months back, a while back, not too long ago.
Yeah.
But the suggestion was made in that email that we might make the episodes available on YouTube. And I mentioned that that was something that was on the radar. Had finally gotten around to starting work on that. We do now have an EDSG podcast YouTube channel, and I have been knocking out old episodes, linking them with a very simple, no animations or cuts or anything, splash page with the logo and the episode name, its original air date, and just getting that up on YouTube. As of this recording, we've got episodes 1 through 7 up and released. The hopeful plan right now is to have old episodes release Monday and Wednesday, and then on the Friday have the YouTube release of the episode that dropped live in the feed that week. So the new episode will still go up in the podcast form on Wednesday, with the video format going up on Friday. So feel free to subscribe, go back and watch those old episodes if you want, or just listen to them because there's no actual video. You can listen to it just fine.
Yeah.
Click like, share them, whatever.
But be specific when you search on YouTube, because EDSG pulls up something else. Make sure it says EDSG podcast.
Yes, EDSG podcast. Although I don't know, I haven't run the check. If you just search Earthdawn, it's possible that it might show up on there because I have Earthdawn as one of the tags for all of the videos. So you might be able to find it that way as well. Also, because all of the actual video titles are Earthdawn Survival Guide episode, whatever.
There you go.
So Earthdawn might always find it as well if you don't look for EDSG podcast. I should probably start dropping the link to that channel in the show notes as well. I have been taking the opportunity, since I've been copying the show notes from the podcast feed into the YouTube channel when I upload the videos for that, to update the podcast feed with the updated links and handles for Twitter and so forth, because I changed mine and the podcast's Twitter handles at some point during the production to make them a little bit better and all of that. So I'm kind of like cleaning things up as I go through there. Related, also in that email, was the suggestion that perhaps with things loaded up to YouTube, we might have a way to get transcripts available. It does, in fact, turn out that YouTube will do their sort of auto captioning, which will generate a file that, of course, does not distinguish between Dan and my's voice, does not always understand the words that we are saying, and so forth. If a kind listener wants to help us out by working on cleaning up that
transcription
stuff, the transcription. So you've already got the file. Really, all that you would need to do is like break it out, marking when I speak and when Dan speaks, and fixing like spelling and stuff like that. That would be a big help, because I started doing it on the first episode and it's kind of tedious, to be perfectly honest. I don't think I got more than maybe 10 minutes into the first episode. Creating the videos, I've got the template all set now. It's just a matter of generating the new splash page, dropping the audio in, and then setting it to process the video. So it takes me, in terms of actual dedicated work, probably now like about 5 to 10 minutes to get things set for the new episode. And then I just let the computer process it in the background. And then when it's done, I like have to do some stuff to get it loaded up to YouTube. So it's at this point now a pretty easy process for me to get the videos put together and up there. And now it's just a matter of the time involved and the number of episodes that there are to get them all up to date there. But let me know, send us an email, poke me on Twitter, whatever. If you do want to offer to help out with the transcript stuff, that would be awesome, and I would appreciate it. I think that covers everything.
Definitely appreciated. So, onto our email portion of the episode, because this is Email Palooza, 8, 9, 13, something like that. Not entirely sure. Hi, Dan. Hi, Josh. This is from Brendan.
Whatever it is, it's all emails all the time.
Oh, totally. Could an adept casting the spell experience death, use their glimpse through the deceased's senses to use talents like Disguise Self or Mimic Voice on any name givers they see or hear in the vision? Thanks. Love the podcast.
No.
Yeah, because it's one-sided, isn't it?
Yeah. You are not able to change or interact with anything that is there. You are merely witnessing what happened the way that it happened. You can't influence or change or actually interact with anything. It's just like watching a video in a sense, or like a virtual reality kind of thing. So there is nothing to use those talents on. I'm not sure what your objective is, sort of asking if you can do that. What you could do is, having experienced the vision, you could then use the information that you glean from that to potentially use Mimic Voice or Disguise Self or whatever to mimic those who you might have otherwise only seen in the vision. You could use the information that you take from that to power those talents to interact with real people in the present moment, but you can't use those on anything that you are experiencing in the vision because you're not there. There's nothing to actually interact with.
Yeah, I figured it's like watching a TV episode. As much as you yell at it, nothing actually happens. That's just me. Okay, on to what we have as a long email from Matthew. Hello, Josh and Dan. In my group, we have just gotten to the point where we are thinking about group patterns, and my character is thinking about enchanting. Been doing a lot of reading also on Panda's alternative rules to the Heartblade, Earthdawn 4th Edition, Anatomy of Discipline 33, Weaponsmith Part 2, posted February 2019. Thank you for being extremely specific on that one. Because enchanting takes a lot of effort, I came up with these questions. For all these questions, it pertains to being able to enchant an item. So the stage is now set. Ready, Josh? Here we go. 1.
Okay.
If you make your group pattern item something like a shield or a suit of armor, could you later add items to that like true elements or legendary items to make the item easier to enchant?
Yes, technically.
Spirit of the law, letter of the law?
Well, we may circle around back to this, but if the idea is that when you are creating your group true pattern and you as the weaponsmith are deciding what item is going to represent you within the group, what item is going to be your group pattern item, if you want it to be your shield because that, metaphysically speaking, represents your role in the group in some capacity, yes. Right, so you could do that, and then just like any other item, you could, if you were trying to enchant that item later, do the other stuff that you would do in order to enchant it. But the problem that you run into there is that according to the way that magic theory works and the way that pattern items work, if you are intending to enchant that shield to become, say, a thread shield later on, it cannot be a thread shield and still be a pattern item for you in the group. Because the true pattern that it obtains to become a thread item will override whatever connection that it is otherwise representing between you and the group true pattern. Because at that point, the item becomes its own pattern item. This is like weird, esoteric magic theory kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All of that said, personally, I kind of like the idea, and there is not ever going to be any kind of official support for this because it's messy and annoying and essentially a whole bunch of edge case exception nonsense that we just don't want to deal with in terms of writing rules because it makes everything a lot more complicated and everything. I like the idea of a thread item that can also act in a way as a pattern item, because that becomes even more dangerous in a sense. I just, generally speaking, yeah, I mean, I sort of see where the question is going, but the idea is not to turn a pattern item, particularly a group pattern item, into a thread item. The magic theory just doesn't really work that way.
Fair. Question 2. If you already have an item built, can you replace enough pieces of it to keep the original pattern, but now have it be something that you built?
What? Real Ship of Theseus stuff here. I'm not sure what the purpose of this is, except to perhaps try and take advantage of the weaponsmith's ability to spend karma relating to things that they have worked on or constructed.
I think he's going for the suit of armor part, where if you eventually replace one piece at a time, you've now made a whole new thing.
Yeah, because remember when we talked about the weaponsmith, they've got a few discipline abilities that kind of relate to that notion. Again, you need to divide in your mind the idea of a pattern item. Okay, something that you are maybe designated to be a pattern item or your representation in the group so that you can take care or advantage of a group true pattern, or an item that you are intending to enchant to be a thread item. If it is not yet a thread item, it doesn't really matter what's going on with it. Once it becomes a thread item, if it's a magic item, if it's a thread item, changes that you make to it could potentially alter the pattern of the item and therefore the abilities that it might display or manifest. But it's also very likely that down the road, those changes that are made to it would be key knowledges of the item, that somebody who is using that item decades down the road might discover that the rank 5 key knowledge is the haft of the axe was replaced, who did the replacing and why, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
One of the things about thread items and pattern items and enchanting thread items is that the rules aren't really designed to allow you to make your own magic items in that regard. Again, like from a storytelling perspective, there's a lot of really cool stuff that can go on there. But essentially, once you have a thread item, changes that you make to the item, especially notable physical changes, could affect the item's abilities and the key knowledges associated with them. If you look at the short story collection Talisman from the that first edition collection, there are changes that are made to that Windling medallion over the course of that book. In the various stories, there are different things that happen to it, and those changes become part of that item's history and that item's legacy, and things that if you were using it as a traditional item, you would need to learn in order to successfully unlock higher rank powers.
Totally.
I hope I'm answering these questions.
I think you are. At least you're clarifying the mud puddle that it was originally. The question 3. Once you make a group pattern item, can you actually enchant it later?
I answered that earlier. Technically, no. Not without it losing its status as a group pattern item, because the true pattern that you instill in it in order to make it a thread item overrides whatever kind of situation is in place that allows it to act as a group pattern item.
Fair. So quick 3 lightning round questions. Can you take an already threaded item and make it your group pattern item?
No, for the same reason.
Exactly. If you can, so that therefore there's no. So can you take an already threaded item and enchant it some more and add a few more ranks to it?
No, not really. The way that threaded items gain power is over time with notable and significant interactions with magic. Yeah. What you are sort of dealing with at that point are what are sort of statted out in the guidebooks as quote unquote legendary items. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, what you would do as an enchanter, assuming that you are making the initial threaded item in the first place, is you make it at whatever tier it is. Let's say that you make it a novice tier item, so it initially is created with only 4 ranks. Over time, and again, we're talking notable periods of time, individual lifetimes and significant involvement with notable magical effects, it might gain additional like rank 5, rank 6, rank 7, whatever over the course of time. And usually those higher ranks above the item's normal rank limit based on the tier would all have deeds associated with it to represent the things that you need to do to continue, or that were done in the past in order to make it more powerful. Not deliberately so, but things that happened for it to become more powerful, and things that you then need to sort of do in order to empower those higher abilities.
Fair enough.
Yeah, once you've got say a journeyman tier thread item, so it has sort of by default 8 ranks by the way that things are built in the system currently, you can't then really go back to it and make it, oh, well, now I want to make it a warden tier, so it'll have 12 ranks. At that point, you are like potentially causing serious alterations to the item's true pattern and might end up causing more problems and stuff like that.
Fair enough. So Matthew had a list of suggestions for future topics on the show. Those are noted. We will not talk about them here because we got a bunch of future topic suggestions.
We're not going to read through those. We've got them sort of all saved off in a folder, and we're going to go through. Some of them mentioned things that we already had planned. Some of them were some good suggestions, and we will sort of look at those and take them into account.
We'll figure those out later. On to one from Captain Olimar. Hey guys, I'm still rolling through the episodes, and I'm on episode 90. Love the dragon episodes and had a question. I thought I read somewhere that Spain and Portugal were known as the land of spikes and fangs. Correct me, please. Thera does not own a... So, is that true? Anything you remember?
The only thing that I'm aware of when it comes to the Iberian Peninsula is a reference in the Theran Empire sourcebook, which refers to that area as the Slithering Wastes.
Oh, okay.
And there is virtually no information sort of beyond that name about it. There might be like it's called the Slithering Wastes because that's what it looks like.
Fair.
It appears to be some kind of very dangerous or highly corrupted region. It is not a province. Does not appear to be under anybody's particular control, but there is virtually no information about it.
Thera doesn't own a province here, and I was wondering if this was because of dragons or horrors or immortal elves. Sailing northward to the east side of the Bloodwood, east of Bloodwood, north of Barsaive and south of Shosara, is this a 600 to 1300 mile area of wild hinterlands? Trekking southwest to Europa and sailing to the eastern coast of the Eris Sea. I read somewhere that there is an enormous obsidian cube that has an insect name givers coming and going, capturing name givers and presumably changing them with a ritual. Is this my imagination going crazy? If not, is it possibly going to be in the Europa sourcebook?
Okay, it sounds like there's a couple of things going on with that. The area north of Bloodwood, north and east of Barsaive, until you get up to Shosara, is largely kind of vaguely undefined wilderness. There's not anything in particular that is specified there. The Elven Nations book, in the section that talks about Shosara, does talk about the region off to the east of Shosara as this kind of vast, trackless, high grass plain with very little information about what is located there. This is deliberate. This is, yes, there is a whole lot of real estate out there, but, you know, it's just big open space to, if somebody in their game wants to drop something interesting there, or we find some reason to continue to expand out into that area, you know, then there's space to do so. That's all fine. But yeah, for the most part, it is largely kind of undefined, unexplored wilderness between the Bloodwood and Shosara.
Fair.
Off to the other side of the Eras Sea, we've got the people across the Eras Sea. They are mentioned in the Serpent River book, as we have discussed on previous episodes where there has been a question or questions about them. I am well aware of them. They will not receive a whole lot of additional expansion. I will maybe answer a couple of questions, but those questions will just raise more questions, or those answers will just raise further questions, or something like that.
Just how it should
anyway, yeah. Morgan and I have had a sort of developer story conference about them. I have some ideas, but that is a ways down the line. It sounds to me like the big obsidian cube with the insects and stuff is an Invi reference. I suspect that is either something that was mentioned in maybe a Living Room Games 2nd edition book. It's possible. I really don't know the info on that very well, whether that was Scourge Unending or Scourge Unending, I think it may be the most likely one because that had some stuff from the returned Earthdawn, which happened in their continuity of things, or just as likely that it was something that somebody developed for their own home game and that it has shown up and been mentioned in various other places because a lot of people really like doing stuff with the Invi. Because bug spirits, you know, like they're kind of cool and all, but it was not certainly something that was part of any first edition material or.
Yeah, nothing about that rings a bell to me.
It's possible because I haven't really reread the book itself. There might be a reference to something maybe in the Theron Empire book. One of the provinces might have a reference along those lines, but that doesn't ring any bells for me on that. But it feels like an Invi thing that somebody came up with for their home campaign. That's what it feels like in terms of a description.
Absolutely no worries.
Not that it's bad or anything. It just that's what it feels like it came from.
On to one from Brian, regular emailer. Hi, Brian. How you doing? Just listened to the Gen Con wrap-up podcast. Great job again, guys. Keep up the good work. I was in Josh's Saturday game. I had a blast. A good friend of mine played in this Thursday game, and he had a great time as well. You talked about Jarol a few episodes ago.
Appreciate that.
In my 4th edition campaign, he has stepped down as the head of the Eye of Thrall. You have to retire sometime, right? But is treated as some sort of spy master emeritus. He encountered my players and sent them off on a mission to deal with some bad guys from Thera. You also recently asked about topics we would like to see covered. I think an episode of the various scrying houses would be great. Hang on, Brian, we're getting to those. I'd also love to see a discussion about Kratos. I know the book was a 3rd edition book, but a discussion of the city and what it was like would be awesome, especially if you were able to solicit some questions from the audience to answer in the episode. Keep up the good work. Love the podcast.
Yep, I've played with Brian multiple times. He's a Gen Con regular. It was good to have him at the table, and it was a good game. All 3 of the games, like I said in that wrap-up episode, were a lot of fun.
I wish I was there. Did not have the chance to travel. So anyway, so on to some longer emails we've got here. So this is the other half of the episode. I promise you it's going to be a long one. Dear Josh and Dan, this comes in from Patrick. First of all, not F-I-R-S-T, T-H-I-R-S-T. Thirst of all, thank you very much for this great podcast. I discovered it 2 months ago. Since then, it is spicing up my numerous working hours on the field, where I listened to crisscross through almost 3/4 of the episodes until now. A couple of years ago, some friends who play Earthdawn since their childhood introduced me to the game, and I immediately got hooked on it. I soon took over the Game Master's role to make us play more often. My friends only ever played 2nd edition, and we still use this big carton box full of very old Earthdawn books and long-forgotten character sheets. So I always thought Earthdawn must be some kind of thing from the past. It was a big surprise when I stumbled across your podcast and discovered that there is actual content and new books published, and the Earthdawn universe became even more alive to me. In one of the first episodes, you mentioned the number of listeners following your podcast. Considering myself a devoted follower by now, I'm curious to know if the popularity of your podcast has grown over the past years, as it would deserve?
Is-ish. Like, it's been growing slowly. I mean, in terms of our actual listener numbers, they've been fairly steady for a while. According to the rating info that we get through Anchor, which is our sort of podcast host, our audience size which is sort of a number of distinct devices that have downloaded or streamed an episode in the last week, tends to fluctuate somewhere in the 275 listener range. So that's sort of unique devices. On average, the number of, is about 175 plays per episode, and that's a measure of how much it gets within the first X number of weeks. Those are rough figures and doesn't necessarily factor in all of the potential plays and whatnot. But in terms of our sort of score, like there's a couple of places out there where you can sort of see where you chart in relation to other podcasts out there. We're actually like reasonably ranked in a couple of the places that we look. I mean, not like hugely like way up to the top, but we've got like a good solid listenership, and we're having fun doing it, and clearly people are enjoying it, and hopefully while it won't add into those numbers I was talking about, maybe the YouTube videos getting up there and getting more of those available will draw some more folks in.
Numerous nasty foes and scary monsters were already defeated by my adventurers group, so I plan to bring up some different fighting experiences for them. My campaign is set as a precursor to the Second Theran War, and my players are going to be asked to help defend a castle of small human kingdom against a Theran attack. They would take over the roles of officers, each of them commanding different factions of the different defensive forces to strike back the invasion, i.e. the castle defending archers, the cavalry, and the infantry. I plan to create stat blocks for both the allied and enemy factions, including attack power, initiative, so my players can roll for their factions as an entity. I also want to allow the characters to take actions for themselves, like boosting up their factions with talents such as tactics or social actions to improve their courage, or positioning themselves either in the back row or front row. I imagine it kind of similar to an airship fight, but having a battle map with different zones, which would be occupied or lost depending on which faction wins or loses a round. Of course, there would be some cinematic surprises included. Do you have any advice or ideas concerning mechanics to make this an epic and fun, yet not too complicated and overwhelming experience for the players? No is a perfectly acceptable answer.
Not really. This ties into a whole thing with regards to mass combat and the way that previous versions of the airship and riverboat rules worked, and trying to strike a decent balance between having something at that scale be engaging and interesting to everybody at the table without it needing to be broken out into its own mini game, and trying to find a good way to have that work the way that I want it to, because the old rules were fine, but really kind of tended to devolve just into sort of stat comparisons and die rolling, and not a way that I felt could be particularly engaging for people at the table who were not who were not an air sailor or boatman or whatever, and so could potentially be rolling dice to be involved in things. So no, I don't really have any suggestions for that. The one thing you might possibly look at, and I don't necessarily know how applicable it might be for your game if you are still sort of playing mainly second edition stuff. I think there are, in maybe both in Iopos and in Empty Thrones, there are stat blocks for groups. There's like a mask sort of that has been kind of created to allow you to do a group of adversaries as a single stat block, and how that works. I don't remember whether there's any in Iopos, but I know there are some in Empty Thrones, and that could provide at least a basic idea, a stat block that you could use as the basis for sort of rolling combats if you are dealing with squads and troops and whatnot. But no, I think ultimately there are a couple of different ways you can handle it. One is to try and break it out into its own sort of mini game where they've got stat blocks and you are making decisions and whatnot. I know that there are people who enjoy that sort of play. I'm not particularly one of them offhand. I kind of prefer dealing with those sorts of things as events that are sort of serving as the backdrop to the activity of the player characters, and maybe having the player characters, what happens to them over the course of a few rounds of combat, maybe influencing what's going on. There was a blog post I did on Faza Games a couple of years back talking about chases and pursuits, and that's all kind of like an extended challenge kind of thing. You might maybe look at that as a way that you could structure an encounter so that the player characters could influence what's going on based on how they succeed at various tasks or tests during the course of a large-scale combat like that. You might even decide to go and pull something from a different system entirely that's designed to handle that.
Yeah, because role-playing games were born out of wargaming. Because
they were, yeah. There's a...
You're just retconning a little bit. Going back in time on rules.
I can't remember the name of the game right now. It's based off of Blades in the Dark. Blades in the Dark is predicated around the idea that you are playing like a group of thieves and you are in this fantasy city and you are doing jobs and settling scores and whatnot. There's another game that kind of uses that same basic system where you are playing like troops that are like, you have a unit and you are playing sort of like individual characters that are attached to this military unit, and there are missions that need to be done and stuff like that. And I cannot remember the name of it for the life of me right now, but that might be something to look towards in terms of inspiration for how you, if you feel comfortable sort of cribbing mechanics and trying different stuff.
It'll come to you by the end of the show. But if all else fails, to actually add a thought to Josh's point, Empty Throne's book, page 213, Opponent Groups. Game information, how to run groups, actions, applying damage, bonuses and penalties, yada, yada, yada. So aim for that right there.
Band of Blades is the name of that game. See, I was trying to think of it was like had something dark, and because a lot of those games based off of Blades in the Dark are called Forged in the Dark, like the same way you've got like Powered by the Apocalypse. They're called Forged in the Dark. And so I was trying to think of dark, which is why I wasn't coming up with it, because it's got blades in the name and not dark.
It's banned.
There was an actual play. This is why I know about it. An actual play of Band of Blades that was done as a limited series by the folks who do the Crit Show podcast.
Yes.
That is part of their regular feed. So you don't even necessarily need to be a fan of the Crit Show normally. You don't need to like subscribe to their Patreon or anything. It's available in their feed. If you go to their website at thecritshowpodcast.com, it's under Let's Play Band of Blades. It's like 5 episodes or something like that, and gives you a taste of kind of how the game flows.
Nice. Patrick's last topic is about the Mystic Paths book, which he recently purchased, and Crossing the Editions. My group's troubadour already entered the messenger path, and it is fitting great into his character, yet many talents presented didn't exist in 2nd edition yet. I also think the concept of Knacks was introduced later. Usually, my style is focused on the story and the player's experience, not on sticking to every rule, so I think I could sort out what to use and what not. Anyway, do you think implementing the Mystic Paths or other new content into earlier edition gameplay creates problems that can lead to major gameplay imbalances?
No, I don't think so. Obviously, there might be some things that are requirements as part of a path that are not in the mechanics of a previous edition, like talents, might have changed, or might be a new talent or whatever. But I think broadly, I don't think that there's any real balance issues with that. Knacks, as a quick sidebar, were actually originally introduced in 1st edition. I don't think that they ever made it into 2nd. I don't think that they published enough books.
Doesn't ring a bell.
I know they didn't have them in the 1st edition or in the 2nd edition core book. I don't think they put them in the companion, the 2nd edition companion, because Knacks were introduced in Earthdawn as part of the Magic, a Manual of Mystic Secrets source book from 1st edition. It's possible, because I don't know those books so well, that the 1 or 2 sort of Adept's Way style books that they did, Way of War, I think was the name of one of them.
Way.
Wanderer's Way. Yeah, there might have been Knacks introduced in those, but I don't recall offhand.
It's been so long since I looked at them, I couldn't tell you either, but I don't recall them doing anything with Knacks. Anyway.
Yeah, but Knacks were introduced originally in 1st edition, so there would not be any significant issue bringing those into 2nd, for example, because they were something that was always there. Yes. Again, like specific ranks, specific talents and stuff like that. Some of the mechanics of various Knacks like play intentionally off of stuff from 4th edition, and so might be a little bit more difficult to convert to 2nd edition if you're still primarily going off of that or whatever. But I don't think, broadly speaking, that any of that would introduce any major balance issues. But if you find out that it does,
please let us know.
Well, not please let us know, but like keep in mind that you are, and you should be, when you're doing this sort of thing, communicating with your players and say, hey, if we find out that something is an issue, or I'm finding out that this is being a little bit unbalanced or whatever, how can we maybe tweak it to not make it so overpowered or whatever?
Absolutely. Last from Patrick. My friends tried 4th edition once before and dismissed it because they thought it would be too much throwing around karma and so many things to handle, as preferred to play as they always played. I guess this topic may be a delicate one because I understand that from a developer's point of view, it's most reasonable to play 4th edition since it developed from and hopefully improved the previous versions. So, if you already got too annoyed about this topic, just leave it as it is. Otherwise, I think it would be interesting to have an episode on comparing the mechanics and updates of the different editions, and especially how it feels playing them. This eventually may be getting more older players to grab a 4th edition rulebook and update their table. That's it for me. Thank you and keep doing what you do. Much love from Germany, Patrick.
All right, Patrick. So with regards to that, I understand that. One of the things that I am heartened by as a developer, as someone who has sunk quite a number of years, considerable amount of time and a few years of effort into 4th edition, are the number of people who, while they don't necessarily agree with everything, feel that broadly 4th edition improved on previous ones. Again, there may be individual quibbles with how things are, etc., whatever. And people who, like, for example, when we first announced some of the changes in terms of the design for 4th edition when we were doing the original Kickstarter and the preview blogs and all that sort of thing, were not fond of some of the things that we were talking about at the time, who then, having played it a little bit, come around on it and realize, oh, yes, these are good things. It plays differently, but it's still recognizably Earthdawn. Karma being sort of one of the big things on that. Yes, with the way that some of the karma works in 4th edition, there is sort of a sense of a lot more karma kind of flying around, but that is an intentional choice.
Yeah.
But also, the karma pool is significantly smaller than it was in previous editions, which, again, a sort of deliberate design choice for various reasons. People have their preferences. People like things certain ways. There was a thread, in fact, in the Earthdawn Guild on Facebook yesterday or today as we're recording this, talking about the things that people liked the most about the changes to 4th edition. And I like how some people, like, one person would say, oh, this is my favorite change. And somebody else said, oh, I don't like that change at all.
Yeah.
So, like, it takes all kinds. There are different tastes. I certainly think that even if you are, say, going to continue playing sort of rules-wise in an earlier edition, buy our new books.
Well, and I know for a fact Josh was staring at me because my podcast before this one with Josh was critical of the 4th edition changes before the books came out. And I have been completely won over, by the way. So I are one of you, and one of my players who I have played with now for almost 20 years, I know is a very fine human being, but is super critical of certain games. And he's played Classic with us. And then when 4th edition came out, we converted to over 4th edition, and he said 4th edition has fixed everything he didn't like about Classic. And so now he really super loves 4th edition. So by all means, give it another shot.
Yeah.
Give it a second shot if you want to have a pun there. Because that's how I am punny. On to one from Mathieu. From Poland, again, hope you're both doing well. Hi, dear Dan and Josh. Despite the fact I'm running my game pursuant to 1st edition rules, I am still regularly catching up with your podcast. Even when you describe 4th edition mechanics, you always manage to smuggle some fine ideas into the podcast. Well done, and thank you. In one of your recent episodes, you asked us to give you some hints as to what you could talk about. We will skip that part real quick. Talking about Landis. Another thing which might interest you and other listeners is the mysterious race or species of Invi. Creatures from astral space resembling insects in its appearance, which infected many followers of Corollas before the Scourge. I am really curious why them specifically, with the aim of transforming as many name-givers into Invi as possible in a horrifying ritual. Invi were eventually stopped, but it did cost lives of hundreds, and once proud cities of Emberlick was lost. Game Master's Book, 1st edition. Do you know anything about this strange cult? All the best.
So before we get to answer that question, if you were not aware, my Polish friend, there is going to be a Polish translation of Earthdawn 4th edition.
Booyah!
My friends Kosmit and Oraya, who were kind enough to fly me out to Poland for their Earthdawn convention a couple of years ago, they are working with a few other people to translate 4th edition into Polish, and I think are launching their crowdfunding campaign for that, like, coming up here. It might have just launched at the time that this episode drops, or will be very shortly launching. So if you were not aware of that, track down that information. They actually have already released Quick Start and Starter Adventure, both of those adapted from our 4th edition Quick Start. So it's got the Masks of Fear adventure in Polish. So yeah, Morgan and myself, to a lesser extent, have been sort of over the course of the last several months to couple of years, answering questions about stuff as they sort of do their translation and try and understand the finer things to incorporate errata or have better understanding of the mechanics of 4th edition for that translation.
Fair. I skipped a paragraph I should not have skipped because I thought he was going to give us a whole list of things to talk about. I was wrong. In one of your most recent episodes, you asked us to give you some hints as to what you could talk about once you finish the recently published material. As I am still running my campaign in the vicinity of Vivane in 1506 Thrall, I have been trying for some time to get a hold of any information surrounding the ancient, pre-Scourge human kingdom of Landis. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, there isn't much that has been published. There was a short passage in the Vivane sourcebook from 1st edition, devoted to Landis, 1 page, while Carafad earned itself an entire sourcebook. It's not fair. I only know that Landis was mostly inhabited by the human tribe of Galeb, and its main cities included Vava, Kelensk, and Tisora, Carafad's sourcebook map, and that Landis wasted its resources during Orichalcum Wars in its strife with Carafad, which ultimately led to its destruction. Please let me know what you know.
Yeah, that's about it. There's a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit more information that you might be able to glean in the Empty Thrones campaign book. One of the adventure arcs in that book is based in a town right on the border of Carafad and Landis, and so there's a little bit of sort of Landis stuff connected to that, but not significantly. Landis did not ever receive a lot of story development in 1st edition. It has these teases and mentions and asides connected with a few thread items, a few legends and stories about the past. The Invi burnings, for example, you mentioned in the email.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, Landis didn't get development or didn't get a book because in the course of their storyline leading up to the landing of the Triumph and leading up to what would have been the Second Theran War in that version of things, Landis was never going to be a notable power player the way that Carafad was going to be. There's a similar reason why, perhaps in 1st edition, Kratos never got a source book, was because it was not significant enough. I mean, beyond the book focusing on the Force of the Eye,
yeah,
Kratos itself didn't really get a source book or any kind of detailed information, because the books not only served to describe a particular area, but also to provide information and hooks for stuff that would be important later on. So yeah, there's not much about Landis kind of related to that. The Invi, if you are not familiar with Shadowrun, the Invi are a pretty big sort of cross-reference / Easter egg to Shadowrun. The insect spirits in Shadowrun, which were a major plot element in early Shadowrun, the Universal Brotherhood. I mean, basically, the story of there was this organization / cult that we found out was actually a bunch of like insect spirits that were converting people and co-opting them and churning them and stuff like that, is basically the storyline of what was going on with the insect spirits in Shadowrun 2nd edition and into 3rd up through Bug City and whatnot. These things show up earlier in a magic cycle and generally cause problems and stuff like that. A lot of people are fascinated by the Invi in a way and like having stories and adventures featuring them, in part because
what are the coincidences we get 2 emails about them in the same week?
Bug spirits and that whole storyline with the Universal Brotherhood and everything crossing over into some of the Shadowrun novels and everything through 2nd edition and whatnot was a huge, major, significant, awesome, slow burn reveal background kind of threat where the player characters in Shadowrun could maybe make a small difference in individual cases, but overall there was too much going on for anybody to really stop it, except in particular circumstances. And the Invi burnings, the Invi in Earthdawn are that same story. But we are much later. Yeah. But we are also much later in the magic cycle and things are very different. They're okay to turn up as a threat or adversary. I mean, early in my running games, I had them kind of show up from time to time. But I don't know that we have a whole lot. I don't know. I don't have any ideas for notable plot events or whatever that would fit any of the storylines of the books. I know that as I seem to recall, one of the arcs in the Living Room Games thing, I think perhaps in Scourge Unending or Barsaive in Chaos, was supposedly the old dwarf kingdom, the lost dwarf kingdom up in north central Barsaive, is it Skull Mountains?
Yes, sounds right.
No. There's the axe in the player's guide that's named after them.
Is it Lorm's axe?
No, not a magic item. There's one of the regular weapons. It's like a dwarf axe.
Scythe.
The Scythen Mountains. That's the one it is. The Skull Mountains are elsewhere. The Scythen dwarfs, the dwarf kingdom of Scytha, supposedly fell to, at least depending on where you get your sources, fell to the Invi, and so there are a lot of them still lurking around out there. They're cool. We've got rules for them in the GM's guide. I don't know. I feel like even though it wasn't in Earthdawn, I feel like the story of the Invi has sort of already been told in a sense. And certainly from a game development and world building point of view, I don't feel like there's anything interesting that could be done with them as far as a book goes. I think they make perfectly fine potential antagonists for individual campaigns or adventures, but I don't have any particular interest as a developer to really do anything extensive with them.
Fair enough. We have one last email before we wrap this episode up, because this was email Palooza 99.
Whatever.
Yeah. This is from Bart. Hey, Dan and Josh. Greetings from Poland. Hi, Bart.
Another Polish listener.
Absolutely.
4th edition Polish Kickstarter, whatever platform they're doing it on, look for it, back it.
Absolutely. First, I'd like to thank you for running this podcast. It's a treasure trove of information. That's all, Josh. I always listen to you while driving to or from work, and I've finally caught up to be, more or less, current. Haha. So, onto the quizzical part. I have 2 separate queries for you to ponder. Actually, I love this fact that we actually get somebody who understands this is the quizzical part of the show. Only 130 episodes in. 1, ally spirits and what they can do. So I run a campaign or sandbox that the party includes a Nethermancer scholar. Frequently, when PCs are faced with a challenge their disciplines are not suited to handle, or sometimes even when they are, the Nethermancer will just summon an ally spirit with the requisite spell or talent. This invalidates the need of some utility talents and spells, and in the case of the party's scout, pushed him partially out of his element. This feels like cheating. Was this a design intent, or is this a side effect? Can you share any advice on how to limit that or to make it inferior to the direct use of the discipline talents? I feel like I'm missing something, or am I way overthinking this?
It's a side effect.
Okay.
It is certainly not an intentional design choice. I am well aware. Morgan is well aware. This is a sort of associated with the spellcaster problem in general, is that if you give spellcasters spells that duplicate the effects of other classes, like this is a niche protection sort of thing. If you give the spellcaster abilities that are equivalent to or better than the talents or abilities of non-spellcasters, then eventually the spellcaster will dominate the situation, particularly in Earthdawn, where there is not, outside of combat, there is no limit to how many times you can cast spells. So unlike a situation like in a D&D style where you have a number of slots and you can only do things so many times per day, you might have a knock spell that will unlock any lock, but you can only do that a fixed number of times. And so in a way, the thief's ability to pick locks becomes better because they can do it more. That's part of the reason why many of the spells were sort of reworked to provide bonuses to existing talents and abilities. Like, to pull a Nethermancer spell out, there's one, I cannot remember the name of the spell itself right off the top of my head, but it provides a bonus to Stealthy Stride. It's like a +3 bonus or something along those lines. It's like a second circle spell, I think. Anyway, it boosts even further the magical capabilities of people who are specialized in that talent or ability, and provides some utility for people who might not have it to not be completely worthless when it comes to maybe stealthing around. But spirits run into a very similar kind of situation, which is part of the reason why summoning spirits was tweaked the way that it was, where it does take actual time to summon them, and that in theory you should bargain with them and make them characters rather than just simply a way to get around obstacles or problems that the group runs into. It's really, really nice if they are using it to solve problems that they otherwise wouldn't, but when you start using it to tread on the group role or the niche of a fellow party member, then that starts to get a little bit rough. My suggestion is, if they are leaning into the summoning spirits and having spirits kind of thing, one, make your spirits actual characters. Give them personalities, give them desires, give them goals that make them more than simply a way to whistle up a simple problem away. And lean into the negotiations and requirement for the spirit to want the summoner to do something in exchange or to offer something in exchange. That's sort of one way that you can approach it. Another way, I would say, is, again, if the problem is that the Nethermancer is summoning up spirits that just overcome stuff, like is treading on the toes of other characters, you may want to address that out of character and say, hey, the characters, other players are maybe like, how are people feeling about this? This is something that I am perceiving to potentially be an issue. Is everybody okay with it? Do that sort of thing. It's a rough situation and it's a side effect, and
no perfect solution.
There's no perfect solution without completely ripping out the current summoning mechanics and rebuilding them from the ground up. One of the things that that Morgan was sort of leaning into was, rather than having summoning be a broad Swiss Army knife, you just kind of call up a spirit and it does a thing.
Yeah.
Of having more of the spells be deliberately spirit summoning flavored. To kind of do that, where you are calling up a spirit to perform a specific task as designed by the spell, which gives you the flavor of summoning spirits without some of the potential issues that you have from the freeform style.
Fair.
I hope that helps.
Me too. Because he has a last question for the podcast, which I think is a great segue to wrapping this whole thing up. Last question from Bart in Poland. Do you have any advice how to deal with Game Master burnout? I'm running Earthdawn games since 1999, and on occasion, I'll hit a point where I can't think of any ideas for an adventure, and or I have problems with getting into character for NPCs. This can last for months, all the while I still want to play, and not being able to come up with something is frustrating. Any ideas how to rekindle the creativity or get inspired? Thanks again, and for the podcast, and passions be with you.
I have encountered this problem myself.
My group as well.
Burnout is real. My first suggestion is communication with your player group. Mm-hmm. Being honest about, hey, I'm feeling burned out. I'm having trouble coming up with ideas for adventures and stuff like that. There are a couple of ways to approach this. I mean, obviously, the communication and the honesty up front is, I think, important.
Yeah.
Option number one is, hey, can we take a break for a little bit? Maybe play another game, playing something that is
completely different.
Something that could be just a little mini series and just give you the opportunity to try something a little bit different. Maybe, and again, a lot of this depends on the dynamics of your group. If somebody else is willing to run a mini series or, a short series sort of game, a mini campaign, half a dozen sessions, if that, or whatever, maybe given a try to try different games, especially there are some games that are sort of deliberately designed to be a mini series or short series in that regard, or lend themselves very well to sort of episodic one-shot type things. Monster of the Week, for example, works really well for that. A lot of those sort of powered by the apocalypse, forged in the dark kind of games can do that really nicely. And the other possibility, and again, a lot of this depends on how your group has been introduced to RPGs. It sounds to me, and this kind of GM burnout that he's talking about can be really appropriate or resulting from a more traditional game approach where the GM has to come up with everything and the players are just kind of along for the ride in a sense, even if there may be some player character motivations involved with things. It's more of a, here is what we're interested in. Now you go out and you write this adventure and come up with this story. You might want to discuss in that communication with your group how they might be able to share some of the duties when it comes to adventure generation or story development or that sort of thing. What kind of goals are you interested in? What kind of things excite you? What kind of plot threads do you see as still sort of dangling loosely out there? Not necessarily asking them to come up with the adventure, but finding out from them what they're interested in, what their character goals are, and what they might want to pursue, and just kind of taking some inspiration from that. I mean, I had that Gen Con wrap up where I was talking about, I had this basic framework for what was going on in a situation, and then just reacted to the player characters and what they were doing, thus had a lot less pressure to have things ready ahead of time.
Yeah. No.
It's rough, but, again, you get there, you have that honesty, that conversation, and either maybe take a little break from Earthdawn and try some other stuff, whether as a GM, again, if you were like changing up your genre quite a bit, like going from the sort of traditional high fantasy of Earthdawn to a sci-fi game or an urban fantasy game or something like that. Take a look at Starhold, for example, is a sci-fi game that has a very aliens survival horror kind of vibe to it. And that has some aspects of it where the player characters kind of get involved with the creation of the setting, but you still kind of come up with a puzzle. But it's different. Just trying different things and being kind to yourself. I mean, life is a thing. And sometimes you just don't have the energy or the creative juice. And sometimes you just need to let that well refill a little bit.
Yeah.
Before you go back to draw some more water. That well can be refilled through inspiration and other sources.
No, a few things my group has done over the years is we will rotate. And if I say, great, I don't have anything, I've run Earthdawn in the past, and I said, great, I don't have anything after this, we can either take a break, do a couple of board games, and I know that online play is a whole different thing, especially right now in the years of COVID. But if you are playing in person, change it up, do a board game, do a card game. Completely different, just get together for the fun of it. And, or if other people do want to run a different game, we would rotate from Earthdawn to Call of Cthulhu to Chill to Numenera to Star Wars. Just change up whatever you've got, and that kind of reinvigorates whatever's coming next, because if you're on the opposite side of the screen, then you get to play one character instead of 15. And so when my game master recently, running 4th edition Earthdawn, by the way, said, yeah, he needed to take 6 weeks off. He said, I have all the stuff planned, but I don't have it ready. And so I said, great, I'll go back and I'll do a new game, introduce them to new mechanics, new characters, new setting. And he first told me after the first session, he's like, I don't have to think of 15 different people. I have to think of my guy. I have to think of my character and what I can do. And he found that liberating. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, he's like, I'm done early. My batteries are recharged. We can get back to Earthdawn lickety split. So another thing he did is he had these dangling plot threads out there, but he said, you know what? Everybody has a backstory. He sent out a character questionnaire. Answer this as if you were your character. 15 questions. Where are you from? What you want to do? You got any family? Where is your town located? Blah, blah, blah. And all these different things. And so he could pull on these dangling plot lines in the background to say, okay, I have a side trek over here. It's an adjacent task. It'll take up a session or two. And then we can get back to the main thing, which if you don't know how the main thing is going to resolve yet, fine. But this is character focused. And that helps all the players as well really flesh out their characters' motivations, past history, familial ties and entanglements and so forth and so on. So that's all fun too. It's not always about hacking this and getting the treasure there. So pull on those dangling plot lines if you've got them. If your players are that kind of, if they've written those kind of characters, I'd say you can pull on those as well, just as I don't have anything major, but we can do this for a little while. Kind of refresh the batteries that way. And see if that could turn out to be a huge plot thread or a plot canyon you can fall into. Who knows? So we hope that helps. Any final thoughts? Because, man, we covered the gamut on all of our emails today.
We have run through everything. Just remember the YouTube channel, 4th edition Polish. Edition of Earthdawn is crowdfunding here.
Makes me wish I had a Polish send-off, but I don't have one. So we're all good there.
It's all good, and I appreciate all of the interest and emails and all of the folks who sent in suggestions for ideas. There were a lot of sort of repeat themes in those, and we will hopefully be able to mine those for a little bit longer.
Absolutely.
Getting some more subjects to talk about.
We certainly will do so. So until next time, folks, feel free to expand the depth and breadth of your legend.
Good night, everybody.